The sitting is resumed. Honourable for St. James North.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to intervene and make a contribution in this very important debate on the National Policy on Aging, which is a 5-year policy, 2023 to 2028, and to, at the outset, say that I agree with the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister that there's this policy document crafted by Dr. Drain Devenish from our university. Same author of, in fact, the National Policy on Disabilities, which Cabinet also approved about a year ago. But while you have a policy on a document, a lot has gone on for the elderly, and let's define elderly by meaning persons over 65 since this administration has come into office in May 2018. So you have to look at it within the context of everything else that has been done. So for example, within a few weeks of us coming into office in May 2018, this administration raised non-contributory pensions for persons over 8 for senior citizens from $155 to $225 every fortnight. A very large percentage increase, over 50%. Of course, we would have had in the financial and budgetary statement this year by the Honourable Prime Minister the proposal to have the Ministry of People's Empowerment establish, I think it is 13 centres for the elderly daycare centres across Barbados over the next few years. I believe certainly one is to be started this financial year. And this is very important because it will be a means by which senior citizens can keep mentally active, which is very important to keep their agility in the face of all the challenges of life. So a lot has been done, and it has to be looked at within that context, since, as Mahatma Gandhi said, a society has to be judged by how it treats its most vulnerable people. And the elderly of any society are among the most vulnerable. I will speak, sir, mainly within the context of elderly persons with disabilities, and I will also propose some legislative changes which should certainly, in my opinion, be considered. But for Barbados, there's been, as we know, and as the aging policy document speaks to, an increase of 2.3 years in life expectancy after age 60 between 1990 and 2017. But however, the increase in terms of healthy life expectancy during that period has only increased by 1.6 years. So people are living longer in our country, but in a lot of cases they're not as healthy, and they're deteriorating in terms of their physical capacity, gaining disabilities in terms of dementia, Alzheimer's. I think there was a report in 2013, I don't know, of the more recent figures, that about 4,000 persons in Barbados over age 60 had dementia. And I'm very familiar with that, sir, because and the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister spoke about her experience with her mum. My dad lived with dementia the last 6 or 7 years of his life. And just as the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister said, you know, my mum and I had no choice but to put him in a nursing home the last 2 years of his life. If not, my mum may have been the one to go first, and she's still alive. So This is a real issue because the longer you live, obviously, the more likelihood you're going to get dementia, Alzheimer's disease, the more likely you're going to get physical disabilities, your sight, you might lose, deafness, your mobility. And all of this is tied in, and any caring government has a duty to address these situations. The APAHO study in 2019 reported that the prevalence of severe disability among older people in Barbados was projected to reach 7.53% in 2020, with those persons needing long-term care services. And we know this for a fact. The figure is, I'm sure, higher than 7.53 now, 5 years after. And this presents a real challenge to us. In some countries, the more developed countries, persons are actually paid a salary and income to caretake their elderly relatives at home. And this is an aim that we would want to achieve sometime in the future. We perhaps don't have the financial resources to do that, where a relative stops home and caregives for you. But this government has done its best substitute in the circumstances in that regard by employing more care of the elderly workers through the Ministry of People's Empowerment to look after elderly people. That was precipitated to a large degree by COVID, as we all know, a few years back, where about 450 persons were employed in that capacity throughout the island. And of course, we have workers from the National Assistance Board doing the same thing in terms of looking after elderly persons during the day, coming in their houses, cooking for them, making sure the house is clean. I think in some cases, bathing them as well. And that's the substitute. And this government has certainly looked after many old persons who otherwise may have been at home by themselves while their relatives who lived with them were working. So it is not only a policy document in writing, but a living policy which has been activated and actualized by this government. The issue also is that our 2010 census, because I know our latest census, 2020, which was done in a large measure during COVID, did not give this figure, but our 2010 census found that persons over age 65 years old in Barbados represented 48%, almost half of the total persons with disabilities or major impairments. So over about half, and I'm sure it's perhaps more now, about half or even more of the people with disabilities or major physical impairments in this country are persons who are senior citizens of this country. And issues certainly flow from that. And every aspect of society, of governance, pertains and relates to these persons. So you have issue of non-insurance or lack of insurance on housing owned by senior citizens to a large degree. And we know that that is a problem, especially during times like these, the 6 months of the year that we are subject to a hurricane season. And this issue, Mr. Speaker, has troubled but not been resolved by administrations, perhaps I believe for the last 50 years. I remember the administration of the Right Honourable Tom Adams speaking about how we as a country, we as a society, we as a government should address the issue of lack of insurance for the majority of our houses for the vast majority of our houses which are vulnerable and susceptible to damage and destruction during adverse weather conditions. And it is perhaps a situation where the administration can look initially at trying to see how houses for the most vulnerable, houses for senior citizens, especially senior citizens with disabilities, senior citizens who live by themselves, could be insured and therefore gain some protection in the event that they were destroyed or damaged during adverse weather conditions. Because it would more pay, it will be better financially feasible to perhaps have some insurance system, state-funded insurance system for these properties than a risk comes about that they are destroyed during a hurricane, like what happened during Hurricane Elsa, and then the government, even though it is under no legal liability or commitment to do so, goes and repairs and replaces hundreds of houses at millions of dollars cost. The issue as well of reshaping the physical and built environment to accommodate senior citizens comes into play in discussion on this policy because senior citizens, those senior citizens with disabilities, have the right as any other citizen of Barbados to traverse all areas of this country. And the question also comes into play. A lot of people, they may be living in two-story houses, and again, the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister alluded to this. They may be living in two-story houses, upstairs houses when they're younger, but when they get older and their mobility decreases, the question then arises, boy, how do you get to your bedroom, which is upstairs all the time? And the issue comes about to trying to retrofit some part of the house downstairs to be a bedroom. Here, sir, the question of reverse mortgages really needs to be considered. They've been talking for years about bringing in a legislative regime to accommodate reverse mortgages, and the Honourable Member for St. James South mentioned about reverse mortgages this morning, but I'm going on to expand the issue. The proposal for reverse mortgages and the establishment of such through the creation of a legislative regime is in the 2018 manifesto of our party, so the Barbados Labour Party. It wasn't in the last manifesto, but I think that it is certainly an issue that the time has come for us to look at. And I want to urge Cabinet to seriously consider this, because we know that there's a cadre of people in this country who are perhaps recognized to be middle income in terms of economic class, but quite honestly, they might be asset comfortable because they have their own home, which is no longer mortgaged, but they may be cash poor. And because their pension may not be as sufficient in some cases to sustain the previous life that they had when they were working. And the issue, therefore, of them being able to mortgage the equity in their home to get cash comes into play. And I really believe that that's something that this administration needs to look at seriously. As I said, it was in our earlier manifesto up to 2018. Issues such as financial abuse of the elderly, and of course this resolution speaks about that in terms of its language, and this is very important. I know that the Honourable Member for St. Thomas, both in and out of her capacity as consultant to the Ministry of People and Empowerment on Elderly Affairs, spoken regularly on this issue, abuse of our elderly persons by their younger relatives. And if it needs legislative regime, I know Sir, it is difficult to have to legislate on everything that, quite honestly, should be just moral issues. I mean, and people need to do what is right and refrain from doing what is wrong. So, I mean, trying to rob your elderly relative now out of money, that they work hard for and that you didn't work for, quite honestly, it's totally immoral, and in my opinion should be subject to criminal penalties. And that's something that I know that the administration has spoken about in terms of bringing legislation to address that, but I would want to urge that such legislation be looked at in greater detail and with greater urgency. Also, in terms of legislative reform, sir, I would wish to propose, and I know that the Ministry of People's Empowerment has considered it. I don't know how far it has got in its consideration, but reform of the regime of receivership under the mental health legislation, whereby, as the law presently stands, it is quite costly in terms of legal expenses for a relative to go to court where the person who they look after no longer has mental capacity to make decisions relating to their personal or financial life. And you have to go to court to get the court to make an order that you become the receiver. Again, I know the experience. I've done many in terms of my legal practice, including my own father, where my mother and I went to court when he had dementia to become his receivers. And this is an area that needs reform. Tied in with this, sir, is the need for enduring power of attorneys, which they have in the United Kingdom and in Ireland. And I know that the Law Reform Commission, which is doing tremendous work under Sir David Simmons, former Attorney General, former Chief Justice of Barbados, and I know that the Law Reform Commission would be happy to assist in terms of bringing in legislation on enduring powers of attorney. Because as you well know, sir, right now, but a lot of people, who are not lawyers perhaps don't know that you have power of attorneys, of course, but when the person who gave the power, the grantor, becomes mentally unfit, again gets Alzheimer's, dementia, that power of attorney is no longer valid. But under an enduring power of attorney, the situation where that the power of attorney given can continue even when the grantor is unable to make decisions relating to their personal affairs or to their health or to their financial or property matters. So again, that's something that I would hope that the administration, cabinet, the Ministry of People's Empowerment would look at, because it will make, all of this will make life easier in terms of legislative regime for senior citizens, those who lose their mental capacity. We look forward to the new geriatric hospital being completed, but as has been said earlier today, sir, the government of Barbados, the state, will never be able to accommodate all the persons whose relatives would wish for them to be in state institutions such as the geriatric hospital. It's impossible. So it's good, I believe, that the new geriatric hospital going up in the Hoddesdon area, the Bell area, would have a capacity, I believe, 600 odd, about 600 persons. But the state can't do everything. The state is trying its best. That is the truth. But we all, I'm sure, as members of parliament, are called on by constituents to see if we can get them in the geriatric hospital, something that is impossible. So again, the best that we can do is alternative care for the elderly program. And again, that was promised in our 2018 elections manifesto. It's set out there that we will seek to establish and promote more alternative care for the elderly programs to include situations where the state would subsidize the senior citizen who is no longer able to be looked after at home in private elderly care homes. And I know there's that provision for it. I'm not so sure that it is fully financed. I believe that it's through the Ministry of Health that the finances go, and there's provision for the pension of the individual to go towards their nursing care within the private nursing home, because I believe now I'm hearing sums of about $3,500 a month for this care. I know when my dad was there and alive, I believe it was about $2,500. It's about $3,500 now. So the question then arises for the state to have a fund whereby more persons who meet the criteria of going in such a nursing home, private, who can't be accommodated at the geriatric hospitals, where the state is able to subsidize some more of those persons. And again, it is something that I urge respectfully the administration to look at in more detail so it could be more widespread. Because we all know, look, our population, we've said it over and over again, is aging continuously. And that's a credit to our society. It's a credit to our medical service providers. As the Honourable Member for St. Michael North spoke of this morning, our Minister of State in the Ministry of Health, that we're able to be looked after these days, and obviously the science of the world too, and medications, that we're living longer. But with living longer, of course, it has its challenges. The issue, as the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister spoke of, parking for senior citizens who have disabilities is an everyday challenge, sir. And I believe that the Ministry of Public Works is looking at increasing the fines for that. It is $500 now for breach of, for someone who doesn't have a disability, parking in car parks, whether government or private, which are reserved for persons with disabilities. And I trust that the increase in penalty, and not only the increase in penalty, but then the implementation and the carrying out of the penalty for those who are in breach of it can come about in the foreseeable future, because it's frustrating people with disabilities every day that people who have no disability are parking in spots reserved for them, and when you tell them something, they won't tell you about yourself or your parents that you never knew about. So again, sir, these are some of the legislative proposals that I would wish to make as someone who obviously has an interest in senior citizens, especially those with disabilities. The issue of reform of national insurance, the social security regime, which is also mentioned in this resolution, financial and social security, that's one of the 8 planks. was addressed last year by the Honourable Minister of Labour, the Honourable Member for St. Peter, and we have that reform. And it had to come about, sir, because, as I said, our aging population, our birth rate declining, and our population declining. And Barbados is not unique in this sphere. Or in many, many countries in the world facing this same problem of declining birth rates. So, for instance, China has recently, I don't think it's implemented yet, but they are proposing, and they will soon be doing, increasing the age, the retirement age by 3 years. 3 years each for men and for women. Men from 60 to 63, women from 55 to 58. To address this issue, because even though China, of course, has 1.4 billion people, its birth rate is declining as well, and their population is said to be in a bit of decline as well. And on that score, sir, China, it was interesting to see how China treats towards its persons with disabilities and its older people, seeking still to obviously involve them in society and in decision making. So something which has to be done, as has been said in here by more than one contributor to this debate, more than one honourable member. We have to respect our elders, sir. And just wanted to, as the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister said, you know, this is the place where it's put on record in Hansard, where you have to clear up misconceptions. And what is taking place in the Democratic Labour Party, sir, some people may say, well, that is their business, sir. But it has to be of concern to all of us as right-thinking, patriotic Barbadians. And the Honourable Leader of the Opposition on, I suppose, a rebound from the disaster, because to use the word disaster, quite honestly, is to use a mild word. But the disaster of a conference that they had just a month ago, gave a press conference, I think about 5 days after, in which he made the assertion that the Honourable Member for St. Lucie, Senator in the other place, Senator Gregory Nichols, and I went first class to China on a plane paid for by the taxpayers to talk about a one China policy. I mean, I don't know why the Honourable Leader of the Opposition wants to involve me in his fracas and his chaos that he has brought, increased it in the Democratic Labour Party. And as I did before on the cybercrime issue, the hearings, I have to do now an absolute and total and abject falsehood. And again, I have to express, quite honestly, absolute disappointment that someone who is a senior attorney at law, right, could make these kind of assertions in public, not caring whether they're true or not, with reckless disregard, not checking facts, and the facts are there to be checked, because you could easily just call the Parliament here, Clerk of Parliament, the Secretary of Parliament, and find out. We were funded by the government of the People's Republic of China. Totally playing fair, accommodation, everything. Taxpayers of Barbados didn't have to pay. And it wasn't anything but one China policy. And even to say that is, quite honestly, a disgrace as well to the party of which he is now a member again for the third time, because that political party in government has, just as the Barbados Labour Party recognized a one China policy from the time we established it in 1977. So, I mean, to fly that off now like if it is some joke, is quite honestly a disgrace to our international affairs. And the fact that Barbados was invited to this conference even in the first place, which was sponsored by the People's Republic of China and by the Interparliamentary Union, as you know, sir, a global institution that Barbados is not even a member of, but that Barbados is invited to this conference, one of 33 countries to be invited, speaks towards the international standing now, high international standing that Barbados has, largely through our Honourable Prime Minister, sir, let's face fact, but also through the fact of all the parliamentarians here who travel and who speak and who conduct themselves with tremendous pomp and intelligence in international affairs. And a conference on sustainable development goals, which relates as well to elderly people, which relates to everybody, because we are fully into achieving these sustainable development goals, sir, and we have set that target as well, and that's what the conference is on. So for the opposition leader to go in his usual style of entertainment to try to create now, I don't know, hysteria and noise among whoever on something that is totally incredulous and totally false. It's quite honestly a disgrace to the office which he holds, sir. And any time, sir, that the leader of the opposition speaks in these terms and in this frivolity and in this inaccurate term, recklessly, because you don't know the facts, but you say it because you're trying to create problems, I will respond in this parliament to it, because it is a dishonor to us all as people elected to serve. So I learned early o'clock that you only have integrity and credibility in public life. You can't pay for it. There's no dollar figure on it. And when you lose it, or when you don't have it in the first place, anyhow, you're in problems. You can't get it back. And I have certainly tried to conduct myself with credibility in any public office I've held in respect of the people of Barbados. And I continue to be absolutely disappointed that a leader of the opposition holding extremely high public office in this country continues to spin inaccuracies in the public domain in substitute for how he is leading the alternative party and how he has brought it to absolute disgrace. Up to today, another member in senior office resigning because of the treatment that they received at that conference 4 weeks ago. So, Mr. Speaker, I fully support this resolution, and I look forward to this administration continuing to carry out policies and programs that will better and improve and make life more comfortable for our senior citizens in this country, those who have prepared the way for us to be here and to have a better life for our people. I'm obliged to you, sir.
Honourable Christchurch West Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It would not only be remiss of me if I didn't lend my vocal cords to this very important discussion, but I don't know if I would be able to live with myself if I didn't stand here in recognition of the importance of a resolution that deals with those who are not only in the toilet of their years, but the toilet in my heart. Mr. Speaker, sir, I want to first congratulate the Member of Parliament for St. Michael South for being able to triangulate his ministry in such a way that those who operate in the most vulnerable space can now have a tangible stake in the existence of this fair land Barbados. When I say, I use the term triangulate, I'm referring to those persons who we would consider the young, the vulnerable, and the threatened. When you have a minister who has sought to run and have the Usain Bolt moment with child protection legislation, and equally a policy and a plan legislation to deal with those who operate in the disabled community. And if you had to settle on, you sit on the Cape, Mr. Speaker, sir, for me, there is now a policy that involves the elderly in a special way and how we will treat to those so that they will have the quality of life that we in Barbados expect our elderly to be exposed to. And Mr. Speaker, the policy priority areas, and you have to understand what this government has been doing over the last 6 years. We now are saying that there must be policy priority areas to deal specifically with those who operate in the twilight of their years. And these areas, Mr. Speaker, deals with the financial and economic sector, the social environment for our elderly, health and health systems. The Member of Parliament for St. Michael North spoke extensively about the health threats and the importance of the elderly being able to access much needed health care, whether there are issues of access to devices or medication or medical procedures. The physical and built environment, and this would have been alluded to earlier by the minister himself when he spoke about the housing needs for persons with their persons in the elderly stage of their life, and of course our social environment. And the Member of Parliament that spoke prior to me, he touched on the legislative arm of this policy. Mr. Speaker, I want to, as the minister or responsible for the environment, to now add the environmental dimension to this whole policy and how the environmental threats that we are faced with, how those threats have an adverse effect on those persons who operate in the twilight of their years. And Mr. Speaker, it is known that we are faced with the climate phenomena, climate change, biodiversity loss, the ever-pressing land degradation, and how these three combined affect those persons who operate in the elderly space. That must be an important part of the conversation if we are really going to realize a national policy of the aging that is all-inclusive. How we treat to those persons who are threatened by the vagaries of climate change. Mr. Speaker, sir, it is known as we speak that climate change has disrupted the lives of those who are full in their youth and are able to defend themselves under the most harshest of situations. We know for a fact that climate change brings extreme episodes of heat, and equally the antithesis of that is the excess rainfall. And Mr. Speaker, we have experienced it from July to this month, to September, where there were excessive episodes of rainfall, and equally, July was recorded as the hottest month since 1850. So these are extreme conditions that our elderly population must be faced with. And how we will provide for those persons operating in these conditions must be part of any aging policy. And when I say that, Mr. Speaker, sir, I am speaking specifically to the needs of those persons. How are we going to ensure that in a climate changing environment where the vagaries are so dynamic that they change with the snap of a finger? 1 minute outside is bright, the next minute is gloomy, with abnormal surges of electricity. You have freak incidents occurring rapidly, not only in Barbados, but across the world. And how does it affect the elderly? How are we able to ensure that they're able to access, in drought conditions, running water, the basic necessities of life? How they're able to access it? And how can we provide, in emergency situations, access to those persons when their homes are flooded? These are situations that we must put full in our visual scope to ensure that our elderly are given priority in the face of a changing climate, which is as rapid as the words that fall off my tongue. Mr. Speaker, sir, not only is the climate change a real challenge for persons, the elderly population, but of course biodiversity loss. The loss of our flora and fauna has had an impact on our elderly population, albeit that we are going along feeling that all is rosy and dandy with our population, with our aged population. Mr. Speaker, I want us to bring our minds to the fact that a lot of our indigenous flora, a lot of our plants were used and are still used by our elderly population in a homeopathic way. Our indigenous folk, the Member of Parliament for St. Thomas is looking, but she may not be old enough to remember those days. But the days of bush tea for our elderly, the days of bush tea. I'm speaking because a lot of Barbadians who are listening would recognize and remember that it tastes bad, but it worked. Just like Butleys. It tastes bad, but it worked. Because they had the indigenous knowledge of plants. But Mr. Speaker, in a changing environment where there is biodiversity loss, there's equal loss of these plants, these indigenous plants, that would serve for medical purposes in terms of being able to buttress the health of our elderly population. And they still use a lot of these products. So a changing climate environment, recognizing the existential threats that we are faced with, that environment has an impact on our elderly and their way of life. And I'm saying is that how will we have this conversation with the elderly so we can get this knowledge of plants, the knowledge of animals as well? Because the Minister of Agriculture, the Member of Parliament for St. Philip South can tell you that most of his knowledge in terms of treatment of diseases of cattle and those chickens and all those other animal stock that he deals with, he can tell you that a lot of those treatments are from the elderly who has traditional inherent knowledge. Like the vinegar, as he said, traditional learned behavior from doing it over a period of time. And how climate change, biodiversity loss affect those things because they are not able to access these indigenous products anymore, obviously has to be a counterpart of any discussion we are having as it relates to the policy on our aging. How the environment and the environmental impacts of climate change affect our elderly must be an important ingredient to make up a fulsome discussion about our elderly. And Mr. Speaker, sir, last but of course not least is land degradation, because that forms the third head of the triple planetary crisis: land degradation and desertification. How does the degradation of our land affect our elderly, who has to be displaced, especially a lot of them in the agricultural belt, who has to be displaced because their lands are being degraded, they're not being able to work the land and do the farming that they are accustomed to, and so their lives are again disrupted. Mr. Speaker, we know for a fact, I come along and see my grandfather and grandmother working the land, producing their own food. I come along and see it. But with the threats of climate, with pollution inadvertently by those who should know better, we are destroying and degrading our arable soil, which is affecting our agricultural production and the way of life of our elderly population. So, Mr. Speaker, climate change is real. It affects our elderly, the triple planetary crisis, the triangulated crisis of biodiversity loss, the loss of arable land in terms of degradation and desertification. That is why it's important that we are able to have reforestation and our afforestation being at the hem of our climate change fight, because we are not only feeding our elderly population, but we are allowing the land, the arable land, to stay intact and to do that which it's supposed to be doing. And of course, when there is erosion because of our conditions, we know that the erosion displaces a lot of our elderly, especially in our rural parishes. Another dimension that we have to look at, because our elderly population, and we may not want to agree, but they have an indigenous genetic connection to the land of their birthplace. They will often tell you, I am not leaving here, because this is where my navel string has been buried for all the years. I am not leaving this spot. So it's for us to be able to put mitigation measures in place, build our resilience so that our elderly can feel comfortable in their homeland. And this is an important part of the discussion if we are going to look within the next 5 years at a policy that encompasses a holistic view of all the issues that our elderly population are faced with. Mr. Speaker, but the reality is there are a lot of ingredients to the discussion if we are going to have a successful policy for the elderly. Because the elderly population don't operate in a homogeneous bubble. There are different dimensions that operate in this group. So what works for one set does not work for the other. And the minister, my good friend for St. Philip South, he is ready to say that there must be a heterogeneous type of discussion. That's what he's saying, that will inform how we are going to about with a policy that is inclusive for every type of every elderly group, as we will call them. There are some persons who are involved in agriculture, some who are involved in sports, some who are involved in other health activities, some of elderly who will go to the beach and relax. There are different groups, different individuals who are doing different things in the twilight of their years. There are a lot who are still lending knowledge and expertise as mentors and Trojans in community. The Member of Parliament for St. Thomas will tell you that there's no better Trojan in St. Thomas than her, especially when she has to vocalize for those persons who live in the fulcrum of that parish. And I'm sure that the person who spoke before me would say the same thing to St. James, although he may not recognize himself as that part of the scale. I am saying, Mr. Speaker, sir, that there must be cross-sectoral approaches to dealing with our elderly population. We must not be able to stereotype those persons with one fell swoop, and we must not paint them with one brush. We have to understand that there are different dynamics working in order to have a policy that reflects the dreams, the aspirations, and the needs of those in the twilight of their years. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I want to say that as Minister of the Environment, I have had lengthy discussions with the Member of Parliament who operates in St. Michael's South, who has the elderly close to the ventricles of his heart. I may operate in the atriums, but he has the elderly close to the pumping vessel in his body. And he has said to me in no uncertain time, Minister, you must ensure that you set aside an environment, a climate safe environment for our elderly, an environment that ensures not only that there is the human factor to what happens in our space, but of course recognizing that we must have a mitigation and adaptation plan, a resilience plan for the elderly in face of a an adverse climate changing world. And I want to say to him, he doesn't have to get the fibrillations as some persons who suffer from heart attacks, because I give him the rested, calm, consecrated assurance from this ministry that the elderly will be taken care of, and we will make sure that we have the plans in place so that they can enjoy in the twilight of their years what those in the dawn of their years can enjoy, and that is a good quality of life under this administration. Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged. Thank you.
Honourable Member for St. Michael's South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, sir. I want to begin by thanking all the honourable members who would have spoken on this resolution during the course of the 2 full days we've actually had on this particular resolution. It tells me that we all recognize how important this particular conversation is, and I really want to thank my colleagues for the valuable contributions that they made, sir. So I do not intend to be long, because I believe that most of the issues were well addressed by those who spoke before me. I also want to thank the person who spoke immediately before me. His affection for older persons is well known. And I want to thank him. I really want to thank my colleagues, Mr. Speaker, sir. I think this is a matter on which we cannot even afford to have a political divide. Because whether this government, this version of this Labour Party, or another political party is in office, the truth is that this issue of aging will affect the country, and that we will have to deal with it regardless. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, I want to begin by thanking all of my colleagues. This process was started, sir, before me. In 2020 is when the conversation and the consultations began under the Honourable Member for St. Thomas. And I think, sir, in this matter, for all those who praise me, I think we also have to support the Honourable Member for St. Thomas, who would have done a lot of work to get us here in the first place. But, Mr. Speaker, sir, the conversation then that was started was a conversation on aging and elder affairs. And the point that they were trying to make was about how do we form the narrative around aging? What is it that we should be talking about in relation to aging? And, Mr. Speaker, you know, I listened to the Honourable Member, my good friend for St. Michael East, and I have a lot of respect for the Honourable Member. So in listening to him, I felt like it was necessary perhaps for me to just explain aging is a process and not necessarily a destination. The process of aging, while to use the term elderly, that in fact is almost a destination. People are considered elderly when they're around 60, most places 65. But aging speaks to that life cycle, getting older. And most of the international, regional, and indeed even the local discussions on matters pertaining to persons getting older or elderly or aging actually use the word aging. And I won't go through all of them, sir, but we could look at all the recent UN documents. We could look at the recent regional documents, but of more interest to me is there was in 2000, development of a national policy on aging in Barbados done by the Ministry of Social Transformation. There was also a similar policy in 2004, the Green Paper on the National Policy on Aging, approved by the then cabinet, sir. And then I recall sitting in this place, sitting right over there, when permit me to say, sir, the former member for St. Michael South East, Mr. Lashley, presented the paper in here on aging, sir. So aging is a term that is well used, it is a term that is recognized, but I take the points that are raised. I also feel it's important, sir, as I wrap up, to say that, as I began and I said in the first time I spoke, which is that planning without action is futile. Planning without action is futile, but action without planning is fatal. And that if anybody were to think that they could run a country without a major plan, then they have another thing coming. Because you have to plan. The problem is that in Barbados, as across the Caribbean, we've done so many plans, people have lost faith. You may do a plan and put it on the shelf. What we must do is to make sure that we implement the plan. Because the plan, as the Honourable Member for St. Michael South East went through, the plan actually has short-term, medium-term, long-term goals. It also speaks about an implementation committee, which the Honourable Member for St. Thomas currently chairs. So we are working to implement the plan. But I take the point that if we plan and we do nothing thereafter, it is futile. But I reinforce the point that if we were to act randomly, that could also be very fatal for the country, sir. That is why this narrative is going to be very important. Sir, this aging phenomena has social implications. It has health implications, so eloquently expressed by the Honourable Member for St. Michael North. It has economic implications, sir. Aging is a phenomenon, sir, that has implications for everything. The Honourable Member who spoke before me spoke about the environmental considerations. We spoke about the shift in the labour market when the Honourable Member for St. Peter spoke. We spoke about the relationship between the young and the old when the Honourable Member for St. John spoke, sir. The Honourable Member for, everybody. The Honourable Minister responsible for Foreign Affairs, sir, spoke about our international obligations, sir, and the trends, and the fact that Barbados is, in fact, leading the way in many of these things, sir. It has implications for all of us, sir. And sir, the vision that we articulated, and I did say I was going to be very brief, but the vision that we articulated, sir, is to be a country in which all older people are sufficiently engaged, equipped, and empowered to lead healthy, secure, and dignified lives in Barbados, sir. Speaking in a large sense to all the various things that we wish to be able to do. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I believe that we are well on our way to doing that. We have 8 pillars. One of which, I must remind the Honourable Member who spoke before me, is on pandemics, disasters, and emergencies, and that is why we have to work so closely together, sir, to be able to address a number of these things. What the older persons have told us in the ministry is that in times of disasters, they feel a certain degree of fear that perhaps we cannot understand. If you cannot run, I saw the other day when 2 older people were crossing the street and a car was coming, and that they literally could not run out of the road. There's a different fear when you are unable to respond to a negative stimuli. And we have to put in place the wherewithal, sir, the circumstances to allow people to feel secure, sir. I also want to say, sir, that we talk about aging because you're not born old. You're not born old, sir. You're not necessarily born, some of us, regrettably, sir, but most of us, sir, are not born unhealthy. If you don't check your eyes when you're a younger person, it gets worse by the time you're old. If you have pressure issues, sir, and you don't deal with your blood pressure, it's problematic when you're old. If you don't eat healthy, all these things compound over time. That's why the life cycle, the aging phenomena, sir, is worthy of conversation, sir. That is what we are really trying to do, to have a policy, sir, that allows us to look at all these various things. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I was doing this thing long before I became a member of the parliament, There was an old lady who lived in Bottom Close where I grew up, sir. They called her, permit to say, they used to call her V. And a Christmas I took for V, I used to carry hampers, and so I took her a hamper. This is years ago. And when I was leaving, there was an older man in the house as well who said, when I was leaving, he said to V, he said, where you don't tell the man something, you can hear the rest. But they drove off. And then they turned back because it was bothering me. I'd given her a hamper. The hamper had in rice, macaroni, you know, the usual. Oh, you know what hampers look like because we all have to do it. But this is before then. When I got back to the house, I said, View, I heard this man say something like, what's this thing? And she was in tears and she wouldn't tell me. It took the man to tell me that even though we dropped off the hamper, she had no gas. And that she couldn't cook that food regardless. And so we then went and I got her a bottle of gas. But the point is, sir, that there's some older people in this country who, because they are the way older people were raised, are so dignified, even if they are suffering, they will not tell you. And that we have to build relationships with people. Those of us who have relationships at the political level, sir, we do what we can do. But I'm telling Barbados that there is a responsibility on Barbadians, people who grew up in the same neighborhoods as people who are now older, people in some cases who came from the same bloodline, some from the same womb, and then who think they have no responsibility whatsoever for people that they knew, or people who they knew in their youth, sir, who was kind to them. And I watch it, sir, because every week now in the newspaper, there is going to be an article. You just pick up the paper, even today's paper. They're going to run into everybody's, and they say constituency. They don't even say parish, because it's becoming a political conversation. They're going to run into people's constituencies, and they're going to find an older person who is in need. And the question that they ask is not where is the mother, the brother, the son, the daughter, the cousin, the neighbors. The question is always, where is the MP? And I know, sir, that my colleagues are doing the best they can. Many of us, sir, we have thousands of constituents. This is the truth. I'm not making any case for anybody. And I do know that if you're an MP, you have a responsibility to that person, in addition to the people, sir, with whom that person may share a bloodline, or certainly in addition to the people that they share a neighborhood with. But the question that is being asked in the newspaper, sir, is always, where is the MP? And I want to say to Barbadians, sir, if we are to arrest and to address this situation, all of us have to deal with it. I am saying to you, sir, and through you, sir, to the people of Barbados, that what is about to come on this country, I do not think Barbados is prepared to deal with. The amount of people who are going to be older, sir, in the next few years, with the best will in the world, unless we build a society that cares, I really think this country has a care deficit. I think I've said it, sir, in many ways. We've seen it with the way they treat older people. We've seen it with the way they treat elderly people. We see it in relation to the way people just dump things all over the place, sir. The way that if you attempt to talk to a younger person, they're quick to curse you off. We have to address that, sir. And that is not a problem that an MP can address, sir. That requires all of us, sir, being able to do the work, sir. The story, sir, of the Good Samaritan, sir, as told by Martin Luther King, I like it a lot because he reversed the question. He said when the Good Samaritan saw the person on the ground, he did not ask, if I stop to help this man, what is going to happen to me? He said, if I do not stop and help this man, what is going to happen to him? And I believe, sir, that is the question before Barbados. If we do not stop to help the elderly, persons with disabilities, people who at the beginning of the school year, sir, need a little extra help, sir. If we all do not stop to help them, the question is, what is going to happen to them? And I know, sir, there's some of us who like to think that we live in our high towers, to the manor born, some of us have achieved in life now and now live in places, sir. I promise Barbadians, because it has happened in other places, if we do not see what is happening as everybody's responsibility, there is not going to be any place where anybody can hide from the repercussions of being delinquent in our efforts, sir, if that is what we choose to do, to help those people who are in need, sir. All of us have a responsibility, sir. And I see it, I feel it with the elderly, sir. I feel it as this society ages, sir. We all have a lot of work to do, sir. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I want to close by saying two things that we're doing. The Cabinet of Barbados just last week, we approved sir, because we said we were going to do it, and we are doing it. We approved, sir, to build out at Sterling in St. Philip, in the constituency of, would that be St. Philip South? The great constituency of St. Philip South. The cabinet approved, sir, to build out at Sterling a facility, sir, to offer daycare and respite care for persons, sir, who are aging in this country, sir, for the elderly, to give the older persons, sir, an opportunity for daycare, but to give their caregivers, sir, an opportunity for respite, costing the government over $4 million because we committed to doing it and we are doing it, sir. So I also want to say that we have completed the drafting instructions. They should come to cabinet. I was hoping to do it on Thursday, next week, Thursday, sir. We've completed the drafting instructions on the legislation, sir, that will empower elderly persons in Barbados, sir. And it's our intention to have that here in the shortest possible time. So this is a government that is working. And sir, I feel like at this point in my life, I say what comes to my mind sometimes. And I know a lot of people are talking about aging and trying to use it as a political thing. I saw a man in my constituency knocking around, putting an old person in the paper, show a warm bottle of water, to put an old person in a paper to say nothing is being done without regard to the facts, to try to disgrace the woman, but in fact disgracing himself, sir. And a lot of people who are talking about old people ain't caring now about no old people, sir. And I know for a fact that many of us in this place and other places go to work every single day to make life better for the people who live in this country, including the very old people who live in this country, sir. And this is what we do, Mr. Speaker, sir. And I think at the end of the day, all of us have to be able to come together to be able to do the work that we are required to do. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, I just wanted to say that. I wanted to thank my colleagues because I think the conversations have been extremely enlightening, sir. I think they have been intellectually expressed, reflecting a compassion and a passion for this subject, sir. And I want to thank all of my colleagues for the support, sir, because this is really, for me, it's a personal issue. You've heard many of my colleagues speak of their own personal circumstances, sir. None of us can get away from this, sir. You know, in 10 years, many of us gonna be in this scenario. In 20 years, certainly almost all of us. And so at the end of the day, sir, we could deny it, we could push our heads down in the sand, but at the end of the day, sir, this thing coming whether we accept it or not. And I say to Barbados, sir, that we all have to be able to pull our weight, sir. So with those few words, sir, again, I want to thank my colleagues, and I ask that this resolution be now passed.
The question is that this resolution do now pass. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This resolution stands passed. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With that, we've come to the end of today's sitting. I therefore move the adjournment of the House until Monday, the 30th of September at 10 a.m.
Honourable 30th, Honourable Member. The question is that this Honourable Chairman be adjourned until Monday, the 30th of September, 2024 at 10 a.m. in the forenoon. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This Honourable Chamber stands adjourned until Monday, the 30th day of September, 2024 at 10 a.m. in the forenoon.